So at this time, why don't we go ahead and go to our actual agenda and come right on up. So Jim, I'm going to give you a few mics.
Will they be able to hear? Do you have microphones?
So how do we have mics? We have these two. Do we need more? Do we have anything else?
Have handhelds?
That'd be a lot easier.
One, two. 1, 2, 3. I probably have to pull this one up.
Check 1, 2.
There are two, yeah.
Actually, I think they could probably pass one back. If I could take one, that'd be great.
You want to skip a lavalier then?
What's that?
You want to do a lavalier?
Oh, sure.
You need to grab that one.
Table stand?
Yeah. How's that? Can everybody hear me okay? In the back, can you hear? Good? Okay, great. Fantastic. I'll sit there, okay. Again, I'm Jim Barnett with AARP. I'm the Consumer Advocate Stakeholder Group lead, and today we're here to build a better framework, and as we do that, it's good to remember that a better framework doesn't really matter unless people know about it. So that puts us at the intersection with a whole other industry, the news business. So what we wanted to do was sort of get some insight into how all these stories about identity theft, data breaches, how do these things actually come about? And who are these people who are actually doing this work? So to do that, we brought together some of the very best in the business, and they just happen to be here in Atlanta. So we're very, very fortunate to have a great panel of folks here for whom we are going to offer some questions and have a discussion, and also bring in your questions as well. So, so as you're listening, write down your questions or keep them in your head, and we'll get to those in the latter half of the panel here. So with that, I'd like to introduce my panelists. Hank Klibanoff, to my immediate left here, is the director of the journalism program at Emory University. And prior to joining the Emory faculty in 2010, he was a newspaper reporter and editor for more than 35 years, holding various editing positions at the Philadelphia Inquirer and serving as the managing editor of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution here. He also co-authored a book, The Race Beat, The Press, The Civil Rights Struggle, and The Awakening of a Nation, which won the Pulitzer Prize for History in 2007. Currently, he oversees the Civil Rights Cold Case Project, which uses multimedia reporting to investigate unsolved racial murders that took place during the modern civil rights era in the South. Anita Sharp is a writer, editor, and media entrepreneur whose award-winning reporting consistently has been at the forefront of social and cultural issues. She serves currently as the Atlanta bureau chief and editor-at-large for Bloomberg News. As a healthcare writer for the Wall Street Journal in 1997, Anita was part of a team that won the Pulitzer Prize for national reporting for its coverage of the struggle against AIDS in all of its aspects, the human, the scientific, and the business. And before joining Bloomberg in 2009, Anita co-founded a media company that created a groundbreaking national magazine called Worthwhile, and later was rechristened Motto. Following that, she launched a new media company called Genius Suite. And on our far left over here is Matt Kempner, who covers technology and energy for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and writes a column about intriguing entrepreneurs. Matt is a stalwart of the AJC, having been there since 1993. His career has included serving as business editor and previously serving as the AJC's public editor, a role in which he was the AJC's senior editor for accuracy, fairness, and customer care issues. Earlier in his career, Matt took on a variety of assignments from business investigations to politics and the environment. Please join me in welcoming our panel.
Now comes the hard part.
There comes exactly, yes. So Matt, I'd like to start with you. You've had a lot of great jobs in your reporting career. You are currently a business columnist covering technology and entrepreneurs, and not long ago you were a public editor, a job that made you newspaper's first line of contact with readers, both the happy ones and the not so happy ones. Can you tell us a bit about what makes a good column and a good story? How do you take on a bloodless topic like technology and really develop it in a way that really connects with readers?
Absolutely. You hear me on this? Yeah. So we get this question all the time. As a business editor, as a reporter, I get hundreds of emails, probably hundreds of emails a day from people who are pitching stories. And most of them we don't end up doing. And the challenge is we have to prioritize what are the most important, most intriguing stories. So we're always looking for stories that are going to, for the kind of publication that I write for, a general circulation newspaper and website, we're looking for something that is going to be appealing, frankly, to your next door neighbors who may not, if we're talking about a technology story, may not care about all the various details of it. They're not experts in technology, but they know it's important. And so what is the thing that's going to really pull them into it? So we'll be looking for things that are important and intriguing stories that they'll see how it relates to their own personal life. And that means there will be twists to it. There'll be nuance to it, because we're not, at the newspaper, we're looking for something deeper than what they might get from another news source that's going to give them a quick headline and a paragraph on it. So we're gonna try and humanize it, and we're gonna try and push the story forward, tell them where the story is going, not just what has happened in the past. So, for example, in the area of identity theft and things like that, we had a story down here many years ago related to a company called ChoicePoint, where they had a breach. It was different than many other breaches because, well, frankly, there was a remarkable irony to it, right? That you had a company that its bread and butter was about telling people, making sure that companies knew the identity of who they were really dealing with. And they ended up being duped by identity thieves who then defrauded people all over the nation. That's an intriguing story on the face of it because of the irony, because of the twist, and because we can also bring it alive with details. There are interesting personalities who were involved in running the company, interesting scene of how they did what they did. Does that help give some?
That's great. And what kind of reaction did you get to that story? I mean, what did readers come back to you and say that was interesting because of this or that, or it wasn't fair, or what was the reaction to it?
The company hated us.
Yeah.
And we got a lot of reaction from readers, though, who were deeply interested in this story. I think it was one of those times, I think, frankly, with a lot of identity theft stories, it's hard to put yourself in that place because there are so many nameless people who are apparently involved. It's hard to put ourselves in that position, and it seems like identity theft is a passing thing. You're a victim for a little while, and then you're through with it. Of course, it can hang on much longer than that. So, but we got a lot of reaction from folks, and we got a lot of reaction, frankly, from regulators too, who looked closely at this breach.
Fantastic. So, Anita, I'm going to turn to you, if that's okay. You spent a good deal of your career covering business news, and you were part of the team that produced the journal series on AIDS. Now, that story began with a threat to individuals that was real, yet very remote for most, and really abstract to think about for most readers. It also was a story that was playing out against a much bigger context of changing social mores, opaque business models, and lagging government policy. So I'm wondering, from a journalistic standpoint, we could be argued that from a journalistic standpoint, it's a bit like the story we have here. It's, again, an amorphous threat. People know it's there, but they can't quite connect it to their lives. So could you talk a bit about how, what the thinking was, how do you pull all those threads together and tell a story against that kind of backdrop and make it real for people?
Well, I think, can you hear me? Okay. I think that, both stories do have a lot in common. Just as you say, there's stories about fear and there's stories about the unknown. And those are in many ways the best kinds of stories because people are just vitally interested in things that they're going to read about things they don't already know about. They can't get from their neighbor. And so with AIDS, the difficulty there was a lot of misinformation. And the story that we ultimately did at the Journal in 1996 went through all the misinformation that was actually put out by the government and how much harm that did in many ways in finding a cure for AIDS. So what I was doing in 1996 was not the same thing that reporters in the 1980s were doing, which is trying to get to the bottom of this mysterious disease that seemed to be, infecting and killing an awful lot of gay people. So, very, very different approaches. And I think where we are right now in terms of the cybersecurity and identity theft, we're kind of not in 1996. We're more in, at least it seems to me, we're more in the 1980s where these things are happening. Personally, I've been a victim. I've had my credit card stolen, and it was just it turned out to be a minor, bump in the road. But then, as Matt mentioned, there are lots of people who it gets on their credit report, and it's an entirely different animal. So. So from a journalistic standpoint, you don't want to inflame a lot of fear. At the same time, you want to be able to lay out what's going on. And as I said, you just don't have that 10-year perspective where you could look back and say, oh, this was a silly reaction, or gee, we shouldn't have done it this way. So you're kind of trying to balance all of those things, and I'm hoping, as part of this sort of panel discussion, as we get into the audience, questions, I'd love to hear your thinking on how journalists have handled the story so far and how we could do it better.
Just to follow up on that a little bit too, what does it take? What did it take to move the needle in terms of public awareness, public understanding of the story in that arc of the narrative about AIDS over the years? What are those elements that we might see coming in the identity story? How might they present themselves? I know I'm asking you to speculate here a little bit, but this is really valuable for our folks.
Well, yeah, okay. What happened, of course, with AIDS, and this was a big part of our story that we wrote about in 1996 because, as it turned out, it wasn't true. But I think that people weren't paying a lot of attention in many cases to AIDS in the 1980s because it was considered this disease that was affecting this one element of society. It would never be, would never affect them. And so the government made a decision to say anybody could get AIDS, and there was a massive ad campaign about all these people who had looked like, the average Joe getting AIDS. Well, as it turned out, all of those people who were featured in the ad campaign were high-risk groups. They were drug users or, gay or whatnot. So anyway, I think you could, back to the identity theft, I think that we might have to be on the lookout for similar kinds of things where either a group or the government or somebody maybe overstates it so people will pay attention. I think that could very likely happen.
Thank you. Hank, a little different take on our topic here. You spent a lot of your newspaper career in senior editing positions, including managing editor of the AJC here and business editor of the Philadelphia Inquirer, where we met back in the 1990s. During those years, newspapers were really at their zenith in terms of their power to effect change. Can you talk a bit about the business of journalism and what are the changes you have seen, particularly in the last 10 years, how the news ecosystem has evolved, and how do big stories develop today?
Well, thank you, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this. I will answer that, but I also want to sort of segue back a little bit and pick up on the AIDS analogy, just because I think it will pertain. Certainly, the headlines about what the state of newspapers is, print newspapers, and you can extrapolate from that the impact that has. I teach students today, journalism students, who are looking for what's next, and I will tell you they're not nearly as daunted as my generation because they see more opportunities than they've ever seen before. And they see, largely through the internet. They understand that there are a lot more opportunities than there used to be. The other thing that I see that's happening that I think is a very positive development, newspapers, the really great newspapers, didn't just cover the news. They had a lot of specialty beats. I mean, certainly you have sports. Certainly you have your arts critic and your classical music critic. But they also had science writers, and they had technology writers, and healthcare writers. And when I was business editor, no one can imagine this happening today, I don't think, but when I was made business editor of the Philadelphia Inquirer, I want you to understand I had never written a single business story in my life, okay? And I really didn't know a subordinated debenture, from Adam. But the editor of the paper said, news. And that's what I need. I need someone who knows news, who's got a good instinct for news, and I'm going to surround you with some really smart people who know about business. And it was the team that was already there as the deputy business editor and the assistant business editor. And he said, and also in Philadelphia right now, the absolute biggest story is healthcare. And this is back in the 1990s. He said, and I'm going to let you hire 4 people to go out and cover that and to go at it full scale. And we did. Now, that's not likely to happen today in the same way. But we had specialists who we focused on. When I got here to the Atlanta Constitution, Atlanta Journal-Constitution, we had specialists. We had science writers. We had someone detached solely on the CDC. We had a Delta reporter. We had a UP, and I'm not saying that I've not paid as much attention to what the assignments are there, but in very specialized areas, okay? What happened in newspapers was many of those jobs went away. The specialists were the first to go. Every movie critic, every critic at the paper was gone, and not just here. I love my friends at the AJC, and I feel very devoted to them. And I feel pain every minute. I understand the difficulty they go through. But it's every newspaper. It's a Philadelphia Inquirer. It's Cleveland Plain Dealer. You pick a newspaper, and they got rid of specialists. Well, guess what? The web is ready-made for specialty journalism. And so you see a lot of niche reporting coming up about the environment. That's all the Greenwire, you name them, whatever they are. That's all they do. Business reporting. I was fortunate when I became business editor. There was a real wave of interest in business news, and Fast Company was starting, and a lot of business publications. And then that sort of dissipated on the newspaper print side, but has really picked up in a lot of other venues, particularly the web. I remember when the street.com was flat on its back. It didn't look like it would survive, and now it is. But when you lose specialty reporters, you out there who are a lot smarter about your subject than any reporter you will ever deal with, okay? The burden shifts to you, unfortunately, to be very clear speaking about what your business is, okay? And I can tell you just as another example, and when I was with the Philadelphia Inquirer and I was sent out to be the national correspondent based in Chicago covering the Midwest. It was in the mid-1980s. You may or may not remember the mid-1980s was a horrible time in the Midwest for the family farms. President Reagan, very much a free market guy, said we are stopping the crop subsidies, we're stopping crop insurance, we're pulling the props out from these farms. And they did. Not completely, but it was devastating to farmers. And I'm suddenly thrown into this crisis of having to cover agriculture, about which, again, I didn't know anything. In fact, I know a lot less about things than I know more about things, okay? But I relied on the experts like you. And thank goodness they were patient. And I could call, rural economists at Iowa State and Kansas State and University of Missouri and say, I know I just talked to you last week, and you were really wonderful to explain to me how the crop subsidy system works, but I need you to go over some of it again. I'm not quite clear. And they would always, Neil Harrell at Iowa State would always say, absolutely, I want to help you get it right. It does my business no good if you get it wrong and if you misunderstand. And so what has happened more and more is that the burden has shifted to you, to the experts in all these fields, to deal with more and more generalist reporters, not shun them because they have access to the mainstream, while keeping your relationships with the niche reporters and making sure they're aware of what's over the horizon.
Hank, you brought up a great point about the evolution of it's an overused word, ecosystem, but the news ecosystem and how the web is really tailor-made for very specialized reporting. So we've seen the emergence of a lot of very narrow news channels, and the ecosystem, while the broad interest newspapers may be shrinking in terms of their reach, the ecosystem is getting a lot bigger. So are we richer for that, or are we poor in the sense we're talking past each other if we don't know the language from a specific topic area? What's the net of that?
Well, the net is that it really poses a challenge. You've got a quadricated ecosystem, to use your word, not even of the people who are doing the news, generating the news, but of the audience. And you have it's incumbent on you to say, how do we reach all of these different audiences, all of these different media that are out there that operate with different metabolisms, different level of expertise. And I think any strategic plan you have for how getting your word out has to have multiple layers to it. But the one thing that I can tell you that is absolute is clarity. Clarity in everything. Learning how to talk a language that journalists talk. If you, honest to goodness, if you send me, no disrespect, but if you send me an email that has IDESG on it, I'm going to say, IDESG. I don't know. So, how do you connect with people in a way that gets them? I don't want to hog, but I just want to circle back to the AIDS thing. Another thing and I was covering AIDS in the early 1980s, okay? And there was a lot of misunderstanding. And I happened to work at a paper, the Philadelphia Inquirer, and you may remember Don Drake was a spectacular reporter. He was in on it early, and he understood what it was. And he understood that because he relied in large part on two people. Not entirely, but on two people, Jim Curran at the CDC here and Tony Fauci of the National Institutes for Infectious Diseases. And they informed a generation of reporters who would listen to them about the truth about AIDS. And those reporters who listened to them got it right. And those who didn't got it wrong. In fact, I was during the Ebola crisis, I was glad to see Tony Fauci comes back out, and now he's educating a whole new generation, demythologizing these crises. So who is your Jim Curran? Who is your Tony Fauci? The person who can clarify. I mean, we spent weeks at the Philadelphia Inquirer planning what we called a day in the life of AIDS. Worldwide, and we sent reporters and photographers all across the world and did 24 hours in the life of AIDS, and it was a phenomenal enterprise. And I wonder today, you could do 24 hours in the life of identity theft in this world. You could put reporters and photographers all over there and show, here's what it looks like, and it brings it home to people. It brings it home, and you don't have, in my situation, I got to know Ryan White, the AIDS victim who was 16 at the time, if I recall. And through that humanized it for a lot of people. So there are multiple ways to go at it to make it more digestible to people.
Fantastic. Anita, I want to pivot that question a little bit for you, too, as well, if you don't mind. Back to sort of the ecosystem, the business of news. Your employer, Bloomberg, is an amazing organization. It has gone from being a very specialized organization to one that's being called upon to provide news of all sorts, from sports to government. In Washington, D.C., it's bought up numbers of properties that were independent for a long time. And so it's an amazing organization. Can you talk a little bit about this question about the news ecosystem and what's out there and how, what it's like to have a trail between specialized publications versus a broader publication, broader news service?
Sure, and also this is very much a work in progress right now at Bloomberg because, as you may or may not know, Bloomberg was started and is majority owned by the former mayor, Mike Bloomberg, who has returned to the fold. So Mike is now running the company, and I wasn't in the room when he said this, but supposedly he walked in one of his first days and he said, Jesus, when I left, we had one news service and now we've got 12. And so, we've all been charged, with essentially unifying this ecosystem, because we have the, what is said to be either the largest or second largest news staff in the world, I think, behind AP, with 2,400 reporters, and we do cover very, very arcane, we cover currencies of, every country in the world, and commodities and stuff that I couldn't explain if my life depended on it, but we also cover, government and sports and lifestyle and just, the whole plethora of things that anybody cares about. And in addition, then we have all kinds of data. When I started at Bloomberg and I first looked at just the tiniest bit of available data, I felt like I worked for the CIA. So basically, you're asking me a question that we are now in the process of struggling with and unifying. And if I had the answers, I probably wouldn't be sitting here. But
Very good. That was a great start. Matt, I'm going to pivot to you a little bit too. Over your left shoulder here, we have the live chat. We have the Twitter feed going on. And so my question for you, working here again for the big newspaper in town, is how does this work for you? We have this explosion of sources, especially through social media, that you can tap into, and you can also use to put out your stories or to draw attention to them or get help on stories even. Tell me how that's gone for you over the last few years. How is that evolving?
We use social media heavily. We tweet, we put out stuff on Facebook, pretty much basic stuff like you'll see at lots and lots of media outlets. It's how we get sources sometimes, if we can vet them out. It's how we can see, it's one measure of some things that our readers are interested in. It is certainly a way that we can significantly expand our audience. Before, I guess in the early days, we would write a story and we would wait for you to come and read it. And increasingly now we are pushing our stories out there. We are taking our stories to you, trying to get it in your face so that you can see it. Everybody's busy, so we want to be part of your busy schedule. We don't want you to miss the most important stories that we do. And so more and more we're reaching out to people through social media, hoping that they spread the word. Now, I'll tell you, there's a challenge in this, and part of the challenge is that for some publications, such as at the AJC, we also have a paid model, right? We give away some stuff for free, but we also have some stuff that you pay to see. And so that's one of the challenges in the social media world, is how to spread the word out there, but get people to come back for the paid version in addition to the free version.
Can I jump in for just 1 second?
Before you do, I just want to say we're going to open to questions in just a moment. So if you have a question, I don't know if we're going to have a microphone available for folks, or we're going to have folks reading questions off from the home audience. But and if you have questions, we'll have a microphone for you in just a minute. Go ahead.
This is just very quick, but I was meeting just the other night with a group of business people here in Atlanta, and these are venture capitalists and real estate developers, and pretty high level group of people. And I said, so how do you get your news? And also, I should say, all of these people were in their 50s. They were not 20 somethings, all in their 50s. And every single one of them said that they got their news from Twitter, and that they subscribed to, Bloomberg, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the AJC, and they would just read headlines, and virtually none of them read stories. And that's kind of interesting and a little scary to me.
It is. And while we're waiting for questions, Hank, I want to pivot to you also and say, what are the kids doing these days? You're in a university environment. What do you see them doing with social media tools, or just media generally? How do they consume and use those tools in ways that maybe older generations have not?
No, I don't see any surprises there. And one thing that I appreciate that many of them do, and of course we make it easy for them to do, is that they do read newspapers. The New York Times is free on the campus, and many of them get that. The HAC used to be there, and it's not there now, but so some of them still read print. I teach a magazine writing course because magazines are still out there, but I also teach it as long form and digital format. They learn every manner of communication possible. We teach video, or we teach podcasting, we teach Twitter, every form of social media. So if they're into something yet that I don't know about, then I'm just as happy not knowing.
Very good. Kim, do we have questions from the audience?
Sure. Does anybody have any questions?
So we'll have a journalism course afterwards about how to formulate questions. But
Can we ask questions of the audience?
Yes, please do. Why don't we do it that way? Let's
turn it back?
let's do that.
Yeah, I mean, I was serious when I said, at the outset, I'd like to know your thinking about how the media covers your industry. What are we getting wrong? What should we do better?
Mary Alice, or Joanne, would you like to take that on? If nobody else, we have some hands. Okay, good. We have some hands. Okay, I think I saw Peter's first over here. So why don't we get a microphone to Peter? No, we're not. Going to make you run. Okay.
Yeah, Peter Brown. You mentioned earlier, I think, as an example about the daily life of AIDS, how it'd be an interesting parallel would be sort of daily life identity theft. I think identity theft is the obvious candidate in terms of being a very high profile sort of thing. But I think one of the concerns I have is where media are really not helping is they are part of the problem in the sense that of the people and organizations that misuse personal data, it's the media. The media rely, I understand that. Their largest bunch of revenue comes from advertising. So in order to get good advertising revenue, they've got to know their readership, and they've got to do the maximum they can to find out as much as they can about the media. I'm wondering if part of the scare or part of the worry, and this is where maybe the more investigative journalism might be interesting, would be a media report on why media are shy of taking on the real deep down issues about privacy online, and how media themselves actually use personal data in terms of profiling. Because I think if you had a really good study on that, it would not only scare the bejesus out of a lot of readers, but it'd actually highlight where the difficulty of some of the issues that we're trying to face where the core of the concerns are.
Well, actually, I'm going to just build that a little bit, Peter, if you don't mind. One of the things that's interesting is there's a lot of discussion in the business about how media companies are becoming technology companies. And it does raise the question, with everybody's got a smartphone and we have the world in our pocket, basically. What does that mean for the kind of reporting we should be doing, whether it's about our own companies or about technology companies that are involved in this? So where should that go? Should we be covering technology companies the same way we once covered City Hall? Anybody want to take that one
on? Technology is crucially important to lots and lots of people. It's been embedded in our lives. That's obvious. And so for that reason, this is important stuff. We cover technology, though, at the AJC, less about company X. Isn't this an interesting company? We don't do much, really. Mostly, we do not do a feature on a specific company, because I guess our feeling is that generally it's not, people aren't inherently wondering, I wonder what's going on at ABC company. I think it's more, we think, perhaps, that they're interested in the big issues that are affecting them. which may be told through ABC Company. ABC Company may be breaking into a new area, showing a nuanced use of something. There may be a technology available that's going to let us do something that's going to affect our lives. That's what we care about. So the other thing is technology companies have. There's just a plethora of them, right? They're all over the place. Regular companies, things that we never thought were technology companies, have become technology companies. Home Depot, a retailer, now has started up an operation near Georgia Tech's campus, in part to tap into people who are really smart on the technology front. So it's a big force going forward. But how we cover that issue is very much, for a general circulation paper, is not in the weeds. It's about hitting those big issues and then telling the story in ways that really connect with people. I'll just say one thing on the I do a column. This is a little bit like reporting a story, but it's a little different. I do a column on entrepreneurs. I just said we don't do features on businesses. Well, we do sort of do features on individuals. But what I'm doing, those columns are about how these entrepreneurs do what they do. It starts with that premise that there's something important and intriguing in that for a lot of us, because lots and lots of people dream of starting something on their own. And so what we do with that column is we look not just at what the business actually is, we look for somebody who's got a twist, that's what I call it, a twist in their story that makes them intriguing, something you would never have guessed at. And frankly, that's sometimes the most interesting things in stories, is the thing you would not have guessed, the thing you didn't know. In the world of privacy, Hank's idea about 24 hours is a fantastic idea. And what we'd be looking for is not the broad brush stuff. It's the details that help us understand something we thought we knew, and in fact, it's much more intriguing than we realized.
Great point. Thank you. Go, please.
Is it Peter?
Peter.
Peter's question. You're right. You're absolutely right. I was in the news business long enough to know that there was a time when they did very little research about their audiences. And it stemmed from a time when they were just making too damn much money. The margins were 25%, and the goals were 25% margin for, your average newspaper from, Toledo to Tulsa and in between, and Timbuktu. I mean, it was, and one point I remember reading when Warren Buffett was himself a little worried that the margins were way too high, and that they were plowing very little of their money back into the product. And he went to one of the largest newspaper chains at the time, and they were from the UK. And here was Thomson, Thomson, and he went to Lord Thomson, I forget his first name, and because he saw him just milking massive amounts of money out of it, and said, "At what point does your margin reach a level that you think, okay, it's going to make me sick?" And he said, well, probably never, but I'm not satisfied with less than 40%. And newspapers were just raking it in. And with that came a certain arrogance, I have to say, a certain feeling that we decide what's important. We know what's going on in the world. And then that translated, I think, over time into decisions in the newsroom. Now, that's the problem. If the newspapers does all of its marketing to figure out where to put newspapers, where to sell them, where to increase home delivery. That's one thing. When it tries to influence the news product based on that. So if a newspaper says, well, we really want to go for the wealthy white Republicans who live over in such and such, the outskirts of Cleveland. That's where our audience is. That's one thing. But when they start to change their news product by abandoning, let's say, coverage of Cleveland because of that, they're changing the whole definition of what is news. And that is happening more and more. There's absolutely no doubt. The invasion of privacy issues, you're right on there, and I have to tell you that I have seen it work. You know, when a courthouse shooter kills a judge and a court reporter and a deputy, you better believe we were pulling out every bit of public information we could find through tracking systems to figure out who everybody was, where they had lived, what kind of litigation they had been engaged in, and you know, that's the lifeblood of news reporting. And so there is an irony that we write about privacy invasions doing things that people might consider to be invading privacy, though I would also argue we're not ever getting stuff that's not public, but it's sort of deep storage public.
Other questions from the audience?
Hi, can you hear me? I'm Mary Alice Johnson, and full disclosure, we actually are the PR firm for the organization, so I'm a flack. And wanted to know, one of the things that I like to spend a lot of time with is focusing on like reading a lot about reading everybody's beats, the reporters that I follow in specific areas, really understanding what they write about and the nuances. So Matt, for example, you said you receive hundreds of pitches a day, which I totally believe that. I want to get my pitch through about this phenomenal organization. So, for example, we have dozens of subject matter experts on security, privacy, identity, consumer advocacy around those issues. What is the best way to sort of get to form a relationship so we can start to introduce you to those subject matter experts, so that when a story breaks, when you will need to go to the organization with the crazy acronym, and this is the PR person that you want to take a call from to talk about that with.
Okay, I'll jump in on that. I think, Matt, you'd probably agree with this, but the email blast is not a good way at all, because if I see that I'm just part of one of hundreds or thousands of, I think, okay, there's no news value really here for me because everyone's getting the same story. I mean, we're looking for something exclusive, unique, and so that makes your job a little bit harder because if you want to get 100 stories, then you got to come up with 100 unique angles and 100 different But actually, Bloomberg has been very much at the forefront of breaking a lot of these hacking stories from Home Depot to Target and Sony and so forth. So we've got people who are just all over this, and in terms of knowing who they are and just saying, I'd like you to meet so and so, have a cup of coffee, or if they're not local, have a phone conversation. I think building the relationship and doing it one-on-one is the best way to go.
So Hank talked about the reduction in the number of specialists that we have. And so that obviously, I agree with him, that creates a whole new challenge for you all. And it puts a lot more responsibility on you to tell us what you think is some of the news. Now, it doesn't mean we're going to go for your particular angle, right? But I'm particularly intrigued by people. I love great stories. That's what I care about. Great stories, things that intrigue me personally. I had no idea it was happening, and I think it's important. And I think other people are going to think it's important. So I'm interested in people who are great Sherpas on interesting ideas that I didn't think of. So I'm less interested in, here we want to introduce you to Joe, who's an expert in crypto technology. I'm more interested in this person, Mary, has 3 ideas of things you may not have realized were going on, and we think most consumers wouldn't realize, but it would startle them and they would find it intriguing. And here are what those ideas are. And by the way, we've got other ideas and other people we can connect you to who have those same kinds of intriguing insights that most people are missing. That's what would make you take your calls all the time.
One thing I would add to that, or other than really working the news media and getting to know them, call them when you don't have anything you want. Okay, if they don't take it, that's fine. But I really love that story you did on so-and-so, and it's unrelated to anything you do, but you're paying attention. It's just like anything else. You're getting to know them. And it's hard on a national and international basis, but if you have proxies across the world who can help you do that, that's good. The other thing I think you have to work on is your group here. You have to work with them. It's a two-way street, and getting them to understand how to explain things. Now, I can tell you, and I don't know if this is what motivated me to get into journalism, but I was a newspaper reader at a young age, like every other kid in Alabama. You read the sports section and you look at the box scores, and then you move from the sports section to something else. And I grew up at a very newsy time in Alabama, and I was reading a lot of things. And I remember once reading a story that came out of Washington, D.C. It's a wire story out of Washington, D.C. about a Supreme Court decision involving Alabama. And I read it. And then I reread it. And then I read it again. And I walked away feeling so stupid. Okay? It went something like this. The United States Supreme Court yesterday refused to deny the Birmingham City Commission permission to deny a voting rights group request for a permit to march or something like that. And it was full of double and triple negatives. And I had, I couldn't figure out who won, who lost. And now my first pity would go out to the headline writer. Like, how do you write a headline on that? And from that, I think, we don't know what influences completely, but from that, I think I was influenced to think always seek clarity. And so just as Neil Harrell had that great rural economist at Iowa State had to find ways to translate to me the arcana of crop subsidies and crop insurance, you need to find a language that works for the people who are going to be your translators out there and your interpreters. And if they get it wrong, don't just stew and steam and say the GD media, they always get it wrong. Call them back up. No reporter wants to get it wrong. They don't want that. They want to get it right. And they will, shoot, I'd love to think that reporters today had time to call you back the next day and say, how was it? Were you okay? I mean, but there's pride, there are other reasons, but they would appreciate a call that say, overall, I liked it, but you really, or I liked your third sentence and that's it, but you really need to, let's go over this again.
So I think that's one of the reasons why I really like the idea of a day in the life of identity, right? Not identity theft, but identity in general. Because I think that we are so focused on very complex tasks. Our committees get bogged down in a lot of the details because without the details, it won't actually. The ecosystem doesn't exist, right? We have to have those details. But we're a multi-stakeholder organization, and some of our stakeholders don't understand any of those details. And so to even bring the basic and the simple to light, reminding people of when they are asserting their identity and when they want to be able to have pseudonymity and other kind of things throughout the 24 hours in someone's life, I think that'd be a really eye-opening kind of process in general. So I just thought that was a great idea, and that it really would take everything down to a common denominator for all of us. So there's another question.
Yes, Dave Burhap. When asked to do an interview, are there any signs that one can look out for that would help determine that the media organization is out to distort the facts for a sensational story?
Don't answer your phone. Okay, you're not the guy I want to interview. If you start off with a presumption that the media is out to distort the facts, that's unfortunate that you feel that way. I was a long time in the business, and there are reporters who are not as good as others. Okay, absolutely, we have like anything else. Though I would say that these days they are far better than they were when I was getting into the business in the 70s. Okay, far better, far more informed, far smarter, and journalists people don't get into the business for the purpose of grinding their axes. And I'm sorry if you think that, but there's no intention to distort anything. And the reporter who rarely we've come across who might have done that, they've been weeded out long ago, you know. But I would say if you can also be an inquisitor to the reporter and say, so tell me what angle are you developing here? What's your point? You know, is this going in the technology section or the general section? Is it going in the news section or in the business section? And you can be inquisitive and sort of get a sense of where they're going, and that helps you tailor your responses. And I was joking about don't answer the phone.
Kim, I think
Just one other quick thing, too. At most organizations, I mean, obviously they're not going to let you see the story or let you know the angle or anything like that, but very frequently reporters will read back your quotes. If that's an issue, if you've ever been misquoted or something like that, and that's where the nervousness is coming from, see if they'll read your quotes back to you.
I'll admit this. I don't know if this is common for most reporters, but I sort of suspect that it is. I live in fear of getting it wrong. And I also live in fear of something else, not telling readers something that they should know. So I tend to ask, and I think this is that way for lots of reporters, we tend to ask lots and lots of questions because, as Hank said, we're not experts on this stuff, not the experts that you all are in your specific area. And so I am deeply afraid that I'm not going to ask the right question, or that I'm going to ask a question and I'm going to think I understood what you said and I got it. I didn't quite get it. And so I think that I tend to ask a lot of very aggressive questions in the interview, and in the story, it's not the aggressive thing that you thought it was going to be, because I've sort of figured out or think I understand where the story is, and that's wherever it is where it is. But know that for me, there is this constant fear that I will have not told the reader something important that they need to know. So please tell us everything we need to know.
Sure, please.
One last thing. When you have a public relations firm or somebody that's trying to talk to reporters about your story, that's one thing, and they're setting it up for you, that's one thing. The problem often, the rub often comes when you get the call on a breaking news story, unexpected, and maybe they're calling you because of your expertise, or my memory, and I could be wrong about on Choice Point, was that there was something later that we found out that they were very difficult because there was something else going on in their business. I don't know if they were trying to prepare themselves for sale.
There was an acquisition.
There was an acquisition. There was something else going on that we didn't even know about, okay? And they weren't going to tell us. But it made them incredibly anxious and difficult to deal with. But because there was some other story going on, and I would just say to you to encourage, if the person calling me doesn't know that, I need to be careful about letting that influence how I respond to them. Either you explain to them we can't talk because of something, or you go ahead and you talk. And I would always encourage you to talk and try to separate out those issues.
Andrew, we have a question from the plenary audience. From the virtual audience.
Yep, from the chat. What is the responsibility of the media to counter biased source reporting by the experts?
Could you repeat that, please?
The question was, what is the responsibility of the media to counter bias actually coming from the experts? Is that?
Yep.
Did I hear that right? Okay. And that's a great question, and that's a difficult one, because I think all of us would agree that, as Hank said, we're not experts, and we can be I hate to use the word spun, but it can happen. Somebody can tell you their point of view, and they can back it up pretty well, and I think we see that every day, and it's our responsibility to, and what we do at Bloomberg is we would never write a story based on one person's viewpoint. I mean, we are exhaustive in going after the other view, and not getting spun. Not to say that it never happens or never has happened, but I think I think there is a responsibility, and I think the way to do it is to make sure that you're always getting the opposite point of view, or at least a number of viewpoints, so that one person's not directing the story.
Well, I think we're at the end of our time. This has been a wonderful window into a business that a lot of folks here just have not had a lot of experience with. And, you know, you've given us some great advice and a lot of good things to think about. So let's have a round of applause and thanks to our panel. Appreciate it very much. So.